Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Nerds of the North podcast. This is Matthew Slacks coming in as host number 1. My co host
Nick Axline,
is
host
also
number
him.
two.
And we're here to talk about some of our thoughts regarding the finale of the fantastic television program, WandaVision. And we're also going to be talking about the implications this show is going to have on the opening thoughts, hopes, and dreams regarding Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and largely what these shows are going to bring to the table for the MCU and cinema at large. So, Nick, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm actually glad we didn't rush this thing out because I did have a lot of thoughts on the show initially, and they weren't all necessarily positive. But as time has gone on, and it's been about a week now, a little over a week, my
Mm-hmm.
opinions have kind of shifted a little bit. I don't know if
Sure.
that's true for you, Matt, at all, but it's true for me.
I don't know if my opinions have changed that much since the episode aired, but I also think my expectations were markedly more tempered from the get-go, just based on what was actually happening in the show. And so some of the reactions regarding how the show ended. And
Yeah,
actually, that being said, we should probably put out a big spoiler alert. If
yeah,
you haven't seen WandaVision to its completion, do not
yeah.
continue listening from this
I
point forward.
mean, we already kind of have a GIF here that kind of gives a little bit away. Just
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, to be fair,
sorry.
that was shown in the episode previous, or some previous
Oh,
episode
you're right. Actually, yeah,
as
it
like a little
was.
vision. So,
Yeah,
but regardless, yeah, if you haven't seen the episode, don't keep listening now. So that
yeah.
being out of the way.
Um. Okay, yeah. So like, let's just get started because I'm excited to talk about this. I wrote a whole thing about it. So,
Mhm.
um, and this will be linked in our show notes if you're also curious.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So starting off here. So yeah, I think I have had a really great fun time analyzing this show. I mean, it just kind of I've been obsessed with shows like this, like Lost, and just
Hmm.
shows that kind of have clues throughout it. I've always loved stuff like this. So this
Hmm.
stuff was like candy to like a obese child to me, and I mean really, really, really obese.
like markedly more obese than you'd even expect.
Yeah, and this finale generated a whole lot of controversy, and it dashed a lot of fans' hopes and dreams,
Hmm.
and I mean mine included. And I think that's why there was such kind of a visceral reaction to it for a lot of people. I know there are
Hmm.
certain parts of this finale where I was like kind of talking to the screen. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Like Ralph
Hmm.
Boner? I'm sorry, but like I was actually a little offended by that, and I think a lot of people were. But in this podcast, I'm going to try and keep this positive because
Hmm.
overall, personally, for me, I actually found the show enjoyable and definitely
Hmm.
worth the price of admission, which is I think $7.99 a month now. I think it's getting raised or something. I don't know. Anyway,
Hmm.
but yeah, I really enjoyed the show, and I think it is going to age incredibly well as it's gone along, as Marvel shows tend to or movies tend to do.
Hmm.
Like the how Feige incorporated Thor: The Dark World into you know Endgame.
Hmm.
I don't know who was expecting that. I wasn't. Like that movie was
Hmm.
torn apart. Like I don't know.
I mean, I think most fans of the MCU could probably agree on the fact that Thor: The Dark World is probably the weakest link in the chain
Yeah,
regarding narrative. And I definitely even have, close personal friends that who believe that, the version of Thor that was first introduced to us in his first film debut, um, that that version of Thor is better than the version presented to us in Ragnarok. And
huh?
I don't,
I disagree
yeah, I wholly
vehemently.
disagree. Yeah,
Yeah,
right. Because Chris
yeah,
Hemsworth as Thor in that first movie was not. I'm not going to say horrible. That's extreme, but definitely not as good as the version of Thor that we get in Ragnarok.
I just think in Ragnarok you kind of see him. Well, I was gonna say lower his hair or whatever the saying is, but he got his hair
Mhm.
trimmed in that film. Like it
Right,
was
yeah.
it was a he was having fun and it was contagious. So,
Oh yeah, and I think it was just such a. I mean, everyone talks about how such a colorful film. Like it's a
yeah,
movie that kind of gets away from this very dark, drab world of action that we find ourselves in.
right,
Shade gray, blue, and orange that get
right,
thrown in, and
yeah.
but yeah, not to get that far off topic, um, but yeah, the MCU has been this ever-changing beast, and now we find ourselves in this world where a television series is getting tied in to this series of movies that are eventually going to come out, world events notwithstanding. And and I think the expectations for WandaVision were so high, partially because of that, because we all have been stuck at home and haven't had that much going on. And I know that right out the gate, like this wasn't going to introduce the X-Men and the multiverse and Evan Peters as Quicksilver as he was from the Fox movies and bring back Vision from the dead. It accomplished one of those things, and I think that's plenty given the
Well,
circumstances.
um, just as an aside here, I think this is the right article. Um,
Hmm.
this is the interview with Matt Shakman, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's essentially one point. At one point, let's see. I'm going to try and find it real fast. I probably should have this ready to go.
Hmm.
Let's see. There's a question he gets asked, and he's like, "Well, what do you feel about like people were really upset that all this stuff didn't happen, all that their theories didn't play out." And essentially, he's like, "You guys know that the multiverse and the X Men are going to get introduced. Like, don't worry about it. It's going to happen. So don't get too
Hmm.
too upset about it." Yeah,
Right,
I think
and I mean,
here, man, I wish I would have pulled this up, but yeah, essentially that's what he said, which I thought was like
mhm.
kind of therapeutic in
Right,
a way, like for me at
yeah.
least.
Well, and it's confirmation too, right? Like
Yeah,
we know that's coming. Like Disney would not have gone so far out of their way as to be adding that to their catalog to not be including them in their now ginormous set of movies to expand the universe in this way. For them not to use it would be completely insane. So
yeah,
like it's coming. Of course it's coming. But they're gonna do it in the slow and pragmatic way that we all appreciate out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They're not gonna DC this shit and just be like, we demand that
one
you
would hope.
love Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, regardless of character development, and you will
Yeah,
pay for it. So say we, DC.
yeah. I mean, I have stuff to say about that, but that's honestly so far off topic. I'm not going to talk about it right now.
Right.
I'm
But
just going
yeah,
to start with the right now with the blog, just to make sure that we're uh,
we're on
trying to blank on the
track.
word
Mhm.
on track, and also making sure that we're respecting your time. There we go. That's what I was searching for.
There you
Um,
go.
so yeah, so this I'm not going to hold up too long on this point, but because I don't, not everyone's watched Gravity Falls, so I don't really want to get into it. But what I want to talk about, I think for this at any rate was, and I don't want to be too negative, but I think Wanda's, in quotations, come to Jesus moment where she realizes what she's doing isn't necessarily a good thing. She walks out into the middle of the street, and a bunch of the villagers or townspeople come out and start like berating her and saying, "Hey, man, let my daughter out of her room." And Wanda like
Hmm.
freaks out and like releases all these people from their stranglehold that she has them under.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people, me included, were felt like Wanda didn't necessarily, she didn't suffer enough for what she had done.
Hmm.
And again, I want to temper something right now too, because I think that she may in the future,
Hmm.
and I just don't know if the show was gonna show that yet. But I think as far as like a cathartic experience as a viewer of the television program as it is now, I
Hmm.
do think that maybe she should have suffered a little bit more for what she is, because she is an anti-hero. And
Hmm.
actually Jack Schaefer, the creator of the show, basically said that,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, she was an anti-hero, and that's how they were trying to
Hmm.
portray her, which I think is interesting. And going forward, especially as we dive further into this blog or this podcast, I think we're going to see that. I think they are setting something up, especially with the Darkhold and Agatha and the Scarlet Witch, destined to destroy the world. I mean, is that even from the Marvel universe? I don't know enough about it, but I mean, I find that fascinating and makes her character way more interesting to me. I mean, it recontextualized her character up to that point. I mean, what would you do if you were told you were going to become the Antichrist someday? I hope she struggles with that. I think that's a really fascinating question, because if I was told that, I would really struggle with that. I would struggle with whether I should keep living or not, if I deserve to keep living. And I don't think Wanda, as of yet, has really shown how she feels about that fact. And she took away all these people's agency. And it seems like such a small thing from a viewer standpoint, but they're going to be living with that for years. They probably will have really terrible PTSD from that. I mean, I don't know what I would feel like. I don't want to make this comparison, but they were like mind screwed. Like, she entered their mind, she controlled them. That's a really terrible thing to do to someone. And it's interesting as a viewer how we can forgive someone for that. But in the real world, we would never probably forgive someone for doing something like that, even though no one died. But in a way, it's worse in a way. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, we find ourselves in a situation in the show that I think that's exactly why characters like Hayward exist, to be the quote unquote villain, or even Agatha, for example, because if you remove them from the equation, then there are no other villains outside of Wanda. Like, she is the villain. She's controlling an entire town for her own, bereavement, and not being able to come to terms with what happened to her and what happened to Vision specifically. But you introduce Agatha to add this, like, oh, she's also a witch. See, isn't that curious? And she's also a power hungry witch. Ooh, scary. And like both the villains that they introduce in this show are power hungry, and their motivations begin and end there. Hayward wants Vision ultimately, and wants to be done with the situation with Wanda. And then Agatha wants to know how Wanda's doing all of this and ultimately control that power. But outside of that, their motivations are fairly shallow. Like, there's no world domination. There's no game plan outside of that. That's just what the things they want is power. And whereas Wanda as a villain is almost benign by nature, in that she just wants a normal life, or her version of a normal life, but the way in which she attains it is so evil, which is what makes her the worst villain out of the three, I think, by far.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Like, that town, and I think like Monica Rambeau's conversation with Wanda right before she departs from the city, like, they'll never know what you sacrificed. It's like she sacrificed her pretend people is what she sacrificed. Like, what you're talking about with her not really earning her come to Jesus moment, she really didn't. Like, she ultimately created a universe in which she made a fake Vision for herself and made fake children for herself to not deal with her trauma, and took an entire town hostage as a result.
Yeah, I actually almost didn't talk about that that scene for a reason. You don't know what Monica Rambeau said to her about, they don't know what you sacrificed for them. It's like, she didn't sacrifice anything for them, really.
Yeah, right. Yeah, she's the reason they were in danger in the first place.
It's like, what about me? Like, I'm sitting here, I'm imagining a life where I'm like, king of the world and have tons of money and living on a yacht, and then someone like slaps me in the face, and then like that vision goes away. I'm like, you don't know what you just made me sacrifice for slapping me in the face.
Right.
It's like, yeah, she's more powerful than me, and she actually can create stuff, but it's not like she actually lost anything that she hadn't already lost in theory. But but again, like, I didn't want to really get into it, but I do think there's a lot of similarity with that and Mabeland, for instance. But
Mm-hmm.
again, I don't want to talk about it because I don't think many people have watched Gravity Falls. If you haven't, you should. It is really good. Um, okay, yeah. So let's move on to Mephisto.
Ah, yes.
Yes, Mephisto, because I mean, I was totally on the bandwagon that it was probably Mephisto from the beginning, and I was very wrong. Um, but man, I do think there is something more to Agatha's true motivations, and I was gonna dive a little bit into this because I actually think it's pretty fascinating. Um, so we learned that Agatha actually she has in her possession the Darkhold, which is basically a grimoire that was collected from a basically an elder god named Chthon. His name drop, he's not name dropped in the show itself, but according to the Marvel comics, this is where this book came from. So in my mind, there is a connection there. I know you had some doubts. I kind of think this is where they're going with it. And I think that this is actually hinted at with when Agatha killed her own mother. I think at that point she had read from this book, and she had actually in a way become possessed by Chthon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and let's see, yeah, and like I was gonna read this real fast. I'm not even gonna try and read the crazy
The
Lovecraft thing
language.
there.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna invoke any great old gods right now. Um, but yeah, so the Darkhold's pages contain a number of powerful black magic spells. Its influence is so strong that all those who read it are corrupted, losing their souls and becoming possessed by Chthon.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that right. But I just want to say the Chthon, obviously, it looks like Cthulhu. There is
Mm-hmm.
a word. I don't know how you pronounce it exactly. It's chthonic or thonic, which means from the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that name comes from, I do believe.
Sure.
So let's see. Yeah. So obviously they were who wrote this, and I should actually probably know who created this to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But Chthon was a god that was basically created by the Marvel Comics version of the Demiurge or Demiurge, however you pronounce that. So he was
Mm-hmm.
made when the Earth was created, and this is a panel from a scene where he's created. I believe he's the one on the left. The sexy
Yeah, I
guy
think
with the bulging
his bulging
thing.
elder god
Yeah, he's
muscles.
coming. His like pec, like his under muscles are coming out from above his pec or under. I don't know what's going on there.
The only one more muscular would be Captain or America from that
Yeah.
God we can comic. His muscles so distorted.
But obviously, the writer of this was influenced greatly by Lovecraft, which I find awesome. I love that kind of stuff. We have the Necronomicon, and if you don't know what that is, it was a spell book created by, and I want to put this in quotations. I didn't say this, by the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazed, which is said to be so evil it drove its readers insane, and you could use to invoke the great old ones, such as Cthulhu, Azathoth, those kind of great old gods. And I don't know if you know much about that or not, Matt, but beings that are so much bigger, greater than we are, that they don't even think about us. We're like ants to them. Like they just would walk. We just like walk across the ground and step on ants without thinking about it. At least some people do. That's how we are to them. We're just insignificant little specks.
Little specks.
Yeah. Anyway, that's kind of where that comes from. So who is Chthon exactly? I'll just read this right now because I find it really fascinating. Hopefully this isn't too esoteric for you, Matt, or for our listeners. So billions of years ago, shortly after the formation of the Earth, the Demiurge, the sentient life force of Earth's biosphere, seeded the young planet with its essence, creating a race of elder gods, the foremost of which were Chthon and his siblings Set, Gaia, and Oshtur. The elder gods proliferated across the planet and ruled it for 1,000,000 years. Chthon spent his time studying the mystical forces of the universe and eventually became the Earth's first black magician. Over time, at least 1 billion years ago, the elder gods degenerated and turned into demons, warring with one another and struggling for power and influence. The Darkhold, a chamber among the caverns inside the mountain that would be known as Mount Wundagore, Transia, Eastern Europe, Chthon wrote the Darkhold, inscribing all his arcane knowledge on scrolls made from indestructible parchment, and left them behind to serve as a physical link between Earth and his new home, should he ever choose to return. It was theorized by Logomancer that the Darkhold was originated from etchings carved on the wall of the city of Verleia by ancient and hideous things, the great old ones, among which Chthon was allegedly the greatest, despite being usually recognized as an elder god. Yeah, and Verleia is actually a city from that H.P. Lovecraft came up with. It's supposed to be like under the sea, kind of where, I don't know if it's the same spot where Cthulhu. It's kind of a city that has crazy geometry, Euclidean angles, and just almost
impossible
geometry. You can't understand it. The human mind can't even conceive it. And that saying that I don't even try, but that they take out Cthulhu and put Chthon in this phrase right here, and that translates, in his house at R'lyeh, dead Chthon waits dreaming. So that was taken directly from H.P. Lovecraft. So we're getting into some crazy illusions here, which I frankly love. I don't know why this picture isn't pulling up.
There we go.
But yeah, there's Chthon. He's a dark wizard.
Sure.
Which I think ties in beautifully with Doctor Strange. If they don't include Chthon as the secret villain in Doctor Strange, I'm going to be a little disappointed at this point.
Yeah, I'd be very curious.
Supposed to show up next. Sorry.
No, yeah, I'm going to be very curious about who the main, because obviously there needs to be a main villain for this next. Now that Marvel, they themselves, and that we as the viewers are aware that ultimately these things do wrap up with a main villain.
Right. Well, we're going to get into that. I think this is going to end with Chthon being the main villain, and he's going to be possessing Wanda, and that's going to end out Phase 4. That's what I'm predicting.
Yeah, I could possibly see them doing that. I don't know whether they'll go that direction, but it definitely seems like a strong possibility, just because like all the the information and it seems weird to say lore of the comics, but the history of the comics is there. Right. To lead us in that direction, should they so choose.
Well, I think by dropping the Darkhold like that, they gave a lot away. And people, as far as like the people I've been listening to about this, haven't been talking about this aspect of it, which to me, like, I think this is really exciting for me. Like, I think they're setting up the Scarlet Witch to be the main enemy. And even when what's her name, Agatha, dropped that she was destined to destroy the world. Hello.
Right. Yeah. Right.
To me, it's pointing this direction. And so yeah, you're getting hopefully you're getting tomorrow's news today. We'll see. Okay. Yeah, let's continue on unless you have something more to add, Matt.
No, yeah. I mean, I think ultimately whether Chthon ends up being the primary villain or even the name of the primary villain for this next phase in the MCU, I think that we're definitely looking at I guess if I'm going to make the comparison to what's happened directly in the films and in the show, the closest thing we've gotten to this is Dormammu,
right?
In the first Doctor Strange film.
Well, and I didn't want to drop this right away either, but the Eternals is coming out this year, and it's supposed to be about like the origin of superpowers on planet Earth.
Right.
Like this could easily fit into that movie.
Right.
This
idea,
that's
exactly what I was thinking too, is that like Eternals must be tying into this because like when you're talking about deities such as those of the Elder Gods, you're going to be dealing with an equal and opposing force that is more on the perhaps side of good versus the Elder Gods as a side of, chaos or evil.
Right.
And I think that seems like a really obvious tie-in that could happen. One that perhaps I'm not very well versed in.
I'm not either. Comics, this is the first time I've heard. I was researching this yesterday, and I was just getting more and more like intrigued by it, which is why I dropped it on here.
Sure.
Okay, I'm gonna just continue on here. So we're gonna continue on with Chthon. So Chthon, he went into a slumber. intending to one day return. He granted powers to the Darkhold's users, who forfeited their souls. Over the centuries, humans would find the scrolls and other writings left by Chthon, eventually bounding them together in a single volume, which was the Darkhold. So that scene at the end of the show with Wanda basically levitating in a shack out in the middle of nowhere, reading the Darkhold, obsessively reading the Darkhold, flipping through the pages, while also astral projecting herself, like just looking out into the beautiful panorama that she had, which, I mean, I think you might have something to say about that in a moment too. But like, I think as an audience, like she is looking for her children, and I think that's going to be like something to do with her obsession with finding her children. It's somehow going to be the gateway, and is the gateway to her getting taken over by Chthon, perhaps, or whatever entity. Like whatever reason why she ends up almost destroying the world, or actually destroying the world, it has to do with this like obsessive search. That's my opinion. And the show set that up. Like, it's kind of obvious to me, at least, that's kind of where it's going. Like they said there's something going on with Wanda right now. And this is actually backed up by a comic book story. I'm gonna kind of go through this real fast. I don't know if all of this is entirely relevant to us, but so at one point in the story, or in Marvel Comics, Wanda is actually possessed by Chthon. So Wanda as Chthon, she opposed the Avengers when they arrived to help her after she was possessed, and she imprisoned them in a mystical circle that would summon Chthon fully to Earth. However, when that beast arrived, dressed as one of Chthon's old nemesis from the Knights of Wonder Gore, to distract him, and seize the Darkhold before the ritual is complete. Blah, blah, blah. So I'm not going to go too far into this, but there is precedent for it in the Marvel comic history that she was possessed by Chthon.
Sure.
Here's a kind of interesting picture. The artist had a lot of fun with that one, I think.
Probably.
Yeah, so it's not like out of the completely impossible that this could happen. So I don't know if you have any more opinion about that or not, Matt, but I
mean, I think ultimately, we're going to be going into a much more mystical villain to be dealing with in this next phase of the MCU. And I think all of this is a really obvious layout that they could be going with, because, like, how do you... This is always going to be a constant problem in movies, is how do you top what you just did, and you end up with an even crazier version of that when it comes to the MCU, because how do you go bigger than Thanos, whose ultimately his mission was to snap everyone out of existence by the end of Endgame? Like, first his original plan was, oh, well, I'm going to just get rid of half of everyone, because clearly we don't have enough resources for everybody. But then his tune changes when he understands that, oh, well, that wasn't extreme enough. Now I'm getting rid of literally everyone. So, like, you have to find a villain that can top that. And I think a Cthulhu-esque monster in such a mystical sense would be a really cool way for them to one-up themselves, or to at least stay on track for, to follow the meme, an Avengers level threat.
And for me, like, I feel like this would just be a single phase villain. I don't know if he would necessarily carry over into like phase 5. I would kind of hope he wouldn't, because I don't think he's quite as intriguing a villain as Thanos, probably.
Sure.
But I still think it would, for me, it'd be basically badass. Like, I love like the existential horror. I think it's amazing. So, yeah. So I guess we can talk about Quicksilver and our thoughts on that real fast.
Sure.
I'll just run through my thoughts. I don't think I have a ton on this, but yeah, I mean, like I said, I had a kind of a visceral reaction to finding out about Ralph Boner. Even saying it's so stupid. Apparently, it is a reference to some sitcom, like someone in like Growing Pains or Family Matters or something had like a friend who had a last name Boner. Really? I just think of like the old Republican, like.
Oh, like
head of the House
Boner.
of Representatives, like like his last name was Boner or something. I don't know. This is embarrassing. Anyway, yeah, Quicksilver. So for me, I think that they could still use him. I don't think we're done with Peter Evans. I think he's gonna, or sorry,
Mhm.
Evan Peters. I don't think he's gonna. I
Mhm.
think he's coming back. That's what I think.
Oh yeah, I'd 100% agree. I think, I mean, we've gotten Kevin Feige's gotten this far because of ultimately his vision and direction for the MCU. And for the most part, that hasn't led him astray, um, insofar as that we've seen regarding the movies, because he's been wildly successful in that regard. And I think most people would agree that the phases of the MCU that we've seen have been received pretty favorably. So when it comes to Evan Peters and his inclusion in WandaVision, I think one, yeah, we're definitely not done with Evan Peters, because why would you go to all the effort of adding him into a show like this to not eventually end up using him in a more pivotal role, especially in the films? But I think this gives some credit to
Mhm.
some of the fan theories regarding, like, Jimmy Woo's initial reason for being in Westview.
Right.
You know, like, this gets into, he was there because he was seeking out someone who's in the witness protection program, and we never hear who that person is. And Ralph Boner could easily be that person, because who's born with that name?
Yeah. I
He could
mean,
easily have chosen that name because he's Fox Universe Quicksilver. He's
yeah.
silly and fun. So,
Yeah. I mean, and I don't even necessarily want to like speculate too much. There's so much fan speculation about his character.
hmm
Like there's all like, oh yeah, witness protection. I think he probably is personally. He was the witness
hmm
protection person. But
sure.
I think it's also important to remember too that before this show, and I know this for like, I remember making a Reddit post about this actually. I'm
hmm
like what I said on the Reddit post essentially was like, Spider-Man is setting up all these new inclusions or old inclusions to the Marvel Cinematic Universe from their old movies. What if like they're doing the same thing with the X-Men?
hmm
And I got like 10 replies back. Every single one said, no, I don't want to see that. But after,
Really?
yeah, every single one. But after this
Hmm.
show and they introduced Evan Peters, people went crazy wanting
Right.
this.
Oh yeah.
Now people want it. And like, that's why to me, I think Feige may have actually been testing the waters
hmm
by having him on there, not even committing to having him, but it kind of got a fan reaction to see whether
Right.
people did want this or not. And I think it's a pretty resounding yes that people do want this. They do want
Oh yeah.
some inclusion of the X-Men. And I I know I have a little paragraph down there about it. I think for me, what I would want to see, I want to see one more X-Men movie that has the old actors. I want them to basically have some sort of collision between the MCU and the X-Men universe and carry over the best from that old Fox universe into the new one. And I think Wanda's going to have a big part in that. And I actually think it's set up that you actually see in the show that Wanda actually had powers before she encountered the Infinity Stones. She was a
Right.
mutant. Like she had those powers. And I think the show
Sure.
kind of like it's like, oh, she's the Scarlet Witch. But in the comics, there's precedence for her to essentially she got rid of all the mutants by just speaking a line in that world.
Right.
Like, what if this is the reverse of that?
Yeah,
And
I've been curious about that because, like, having not read the comic myself, I'm aware of it by means of my own
yeah,
research and things, but I believe it's referred to as M Day. Is that
I know that this like the arc is called the House of M.
yeah, yeah, on M Day,
Yeah,
which he says no more mutants, and that essentially eliminates most of the mutant population from Earth, or from wherever, probably mostly Earth.
right.
But yeah, like, I'm kind of been wondering if maybe they would, yeah, reverse that idea, because they haven't been able, I don't even think they can use the phrase mutants in the MCU currently because of legal reasons
They can
regarding
now.
the properties.
They can
They
now.
can now,
Yeah,
certainly, but previously that was a restriction.
correct. Yeah,
And so, uh but yeah, now that we know that ultimately, or because of the MCU and the real world implications of legality, they haven't been able to talk about mutants. So there are no mutants for her to eliminate by means of M Day. So yeah, are they just going to do a full reversal and she brings mutants into existence?
Yeah.
Ultimately, what that means, I don't know. I think that would be an amazing way for them to introduce the myriad of characters that people love into the MCU, in a way that was extremely impactful
Right.
and could spawn a number of movies
And we
just from
know
that point
the
forward.
multiverse is going to factor into Wanda's next movie, which is the Doctor
Hmm.
Strange movie, because it's
Right,
literally in the title. So we know it's coming,
right.
and she's supposed to be a pretty big factor in that movie. And she's
Hmm.
also at that point in the story, she's also, it's been confirmed that she is not necessarily 100% good character.
Hmm.
So how that will play out, I think is going to be really interesting.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think how you were talking earlier about, ultimately what's going to be the catalyst in all of this is Wanda's pursuit of her children, quote unquote, um, from her own point of view, she has had her children taken away from her. Was she ever technically a mother? Debatable. But
Yeah.
she wants her kids back. And her pursuit of that, I think, is what would ultimately lead her to a character like Chthon or whatever deity she ends up dealing with, making a deal with, or she'll be very much like Loki in that regard, and that he had a vision of, conquering Earth, to more or less prove himself, that he's, a powerful figure. And so for him to turn to the Chikari, if I remember their name correctly, the aliens from the original Avengers
Yeah,
film.
it's something like that.
Yeah. So I think that like she will very much be like Loki in that regard, and that she will seek assistance in getting that done because of how desperate she is to have her children back. And and as you've talked about in your blog, like that's going to make this has already made Wanda a much more interesting character in terms of her place in the MCU. And it's going to make her a very complicated character because what is a more relatable thing than for most people, parenthood, to be willing to do anything to get your kids back or to do anything to make sure that they're safe. And she's that same way. She's that character. She will be that person. She will render the universe void to get
Right.
back to her kids.
Right. And I mean, I think Feige's playing around with some pretty meta ideas in this whole thing too. Because,
Hmm.
I mean, what is Wanda but not a person that made her imagination reality? I
Hmm.
mean, that's what he's doing with the creation of the MCU.
Hmm.
Um, so, and I think that's why she's so linked to the multiverse, because it's
Hmm.
stories, right? It's like all these stories that let's see what's gonna happen. I'm deeply curious.
Right.
Um, I was gonna move on to the hexagon thing. I do think there's some linkage probably between Chthon and Saturn and the hexagon. I don't want to talk about that right now. I am kind of, this is the part I'm kind of interested in, and I kind of want to get your opinion about it because it popped in my head. I actually didn't include it in the blog,
Sure.
but obviously honeycomb. There was a beekeeper. Honeycomb is in the shape of a hexagon, right?
Right.
Apparently, hexagon's one of the strongest structures, even stronger than like a triangle. Obviously, she is almost a red queen character because she wears a red crown.
Sure.
So for me, and I was thinking about this, so she is kind of like the red queen from Alice in Wonderland, and that would make Monica Rambeau Alice in this show.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm wondering I'm wondering if that's somehow going to play into this going forward, that somehow Wanda
Hmm.
becomes so powerful that she almost creates an upside down world where Allison, like the world becomes like a weird twisted version of Alice in Wonderland. Not that it has like the same characters, just kind of like the same overall
Hmm.
idea of that
Sure.
sort of situation. Um, just thought I'd throw that out there. I thought it was kind of interesting. I also think it's
Sure.
interesting we can link Wanda perhaps to like a to like a Cersei character from obviously from ancient Greece, or even
Hmm.
Morgan Le Fay from like Arthurian legends.
Hmm.
I'm kind of curious where that they could go somewhere with that. I don't know what your thoughts
Hmm.
are, but
Yeah, I mean, my thought on that would be I would be curious if the reference was meant to begin and end with WandaVision. Only in that Monica would be a great example of this Alice type character if you're going to make that comparison to Alice in Wonderland with Wanda being the Red Queen. Um, if that comparison ends with WandaVision, or if there's going to be further implications of Monica jumping in again into a world made by Wanda, because essentially that's what Westview was her own personalized reality that she
mhm.
was in charge of. And even to the point, that when characters would go off script, quote unquote, they would, like, that first in the first episode, the dinner scene where Vision's boss is choking and his wife is telling him to stop it, trying to like maintain character, but
Mhm.
is clearly trying to communicate to him like you're ruining the soon scene. She's going to be mad at us. You can't do this. And like how surreal and scary that first scene was,
Yeah.
especially like with that being our introduction to the show. Like, what is this moment? It just makes your skin crawl, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that
But
kind of stuff. And I've
mhm,
in my older blogs too, I compared the show to Too Many Cooks that was put on Adult Swim, or even Don't
right.
Hug Me, I'm Scared.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of that weird, like, kind of saccharine Americana that, and then it kind of like this evil presence inserts itself,
Hmm.
and how that relates kind of like to our modern world. And I love that kind of stuff. So
Sure.
yeah, that's a great point, Matt. And yeah.
But yeah, I'll be very curious to see what they do with Monica Rambeau as a character, how much more she's going to be involved with Wanda and the multiverse of madness and the Doctor Strange realm, or if they're going to pivot her more to deal with Captain Marvel and more of the spacefaring
Yeah,
MCU.
I do feel like that's where they're going with their character. So I don't know how much she's actually gonna be involved with Wanda going forward, but
Yeah. To have a scroll show up in the post credits scene and for her essentially to be beckoned to space, who she definitely is being called by Nick Fury, right? Like I think that's something
yeah.
we can agree on is like, oh yeah, he thinks you need to get up there or you need to be allowed to fly again.
Hmm.
Like, who's the he? And it's like, well, Nick Fury's basically been chilling in space since the end, or geez, what film would that have been
I
that
think it
he?
was, oh man, Endgame maybe.
Yeah, it would have been
I think it's
Endgame.
Endgame.
Yeah, it would have had to have been
No. It
Endgame.
was
Yeah.
Spider-Man. It was Spider-Man Far From Home.
Yeah, you're totally right.
Yeah,
Yeah, at least from that point forward, he has not been on Earth, and a scroll has been pretending to
yeah,
be him, so he could take an extended vacation.
yeah.
But yeah, I'll be curious to see what they do
Right.
with Monica. I know she has a superhero moniker that gets associated with her. I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember.
I mean, moving on to the next point, I wouldn't be
Mhm.
surprised because I mentioned Chthon and its hold on the users of the Darkhold. Now that the Darkhold has been taken from Agatha, I could foresee her becoming more, or what was the phrase? She'll come more to her senses now that that hold is, the dark hold is released from her.
Sure.
And you know, even my theory I think is even better now that I'm like dark, the literal dark hold. Like, it has a hold, a dark hold on people. Literally,
Right.
it's in the name of it. And
Mhm.
yeah, I think Wanda has some interesting storyline coming up.
Sure.
Yeah. So I was wrong. Like in my old blog, I said I thought there was going to be a coven. It was clearly only Agatha, but I was right about Agatha being a witch.
Hmm.
Um, which, that seems obvious now, but at the beginning of the show, the very fact that there was witches in the MCU wasn't really known. So I will say that I'm proud of that one. I don't know.
Sure.
I mean, a lot of people picked up on it. It was kind of obvious, maybe. I don't know, but
Actually, now it's funny now that you're talking about that. It just the connection now just popped up in my brain. I'm sure this is probably something a lot of people have already realized, but Agatha is constantly talking about her husband Ralph
Ralph Boner.
throughout throughout the course of the show. It did not occur to me until just now that that was indeed Evan Peters' character and why he hadn't appeared on screen yet. That was
Yeah,
Ralph the whole time.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, no. Yeah, I knew. I mean, they definitely heavily imply that that Agatha, or shoot, what is her name
There's
in the
there was Agnes, and then she's actually Agatha
Ag?
Harkness.
Yeah,
And Agnes
Agnes.
is
That's right.
actually, I don't know the word for it, but it's actually combines Agatha Harkness into one word.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely like heavily implied pretty early on that like there's something up with Agnes. Like you don't know what yet or how that's going to play into things, but you do know that she's going to be an important character, and you knew that pretty early on. Um, and I mean, you weren't necessarily wrong about the coven. She was technically a part of the coven, just it wasn't within the scope
Yeah.
of Westview and what was going on there.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, I mean, that whole bit with Agatha all along definitely was not only very catchy, but just a lot of fun,
She's
to
a
have this.
Catherine Hahn. I think that's how you pronounce it. She's a great actress. I
Hmm.
hadn't seen her before. I don't think, or at least not really to the extent that was in this show. And I thought she did wonderful, wonderful job.
Right. Oh, yeah. And such a great, I mean, not even like a full on villain, really. I mean, she technically manipulated fewer people than
Yeah,
Wanda did.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, to have her put on the bench for now is fine by me. I'm glad they didn't eliminate her as a
yeah,
villain. I think
yeah,
I think that ultimately that this is just me spitballing, but I'm kind of imagining her and Loki like having some connection at some point because they both fit the bill of kind of trickster aloof type villains that like aren't necessarily like the ultimate be all end all bad guy, but they're certainly going
mhm,
to cause problems for the Avengers like
yeah.
together.
I think she's gonna play a role in Wanda's story going forward.
Oh, for
In
sure.
fact, who knows? Maybe she'll be the Alice in Wanda's uh, Alice in Wonderland. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be a fun connection. I'd like that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, even what she's wearing right now kind of reminds me of an Alice kind of character, at least with this GIF.
Yeah, with her dress. Yeah, yeah.
I got the all along. Yeah, yeah. I do find it. I'm not gonna linger too long on this, but um, for whatever reason, red and witches seems to be a pretty constant theme, and I'm gonna kind of curious why that is. Why Hollywood seems to be obsessed with it. There's a movie I watched called Suspiria that really stuck with me. That was about
Hmm.
witches, and a lot of really good horror movies recently have been about witches. Like The Witch. I don't know if you've seen that movie. That's a good movie.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't know if it's like a feminist sort of. I think there's some connection there to be maybe between witches and feminism. I think that's why it's become sort of a popular trope, especially with like
Sure.
Sabrina. Like they remade that show. I don't know if you call it a remake, but it's on Netflix. I haven't watched it.
Hmm. I've heard good
Um,
things.
yeah, I have to. Okay, I know you don't know much about this.
Hmm.
So I've made a connection between Wanda. So she's the Scarlet Witch, right? In the Book of Revelation, we have the Scarlet Woman, also known as the Whore of Babylon. I don't really like saying that word, so that's less I'm going to say it. But Scarlet Woman. So I think this ties in obviously to Wanda's apparently the prophecy that she will destroy the world, or she has some sort of tie-in to the end of the Marvel universe.
Hmm.
Obviously, the Scarlet Woman is in the Book of Revelations. When I put an apostrophe for that, or Book of Revelation. Um, I think there's some sort of connection to be made there. I'm actually surprised more people haven't commented on that, but and clearly there is some kind of weird connection going, like magic. with a K, I do believe was originated by Aleister Crowley. And chaos magic was brought up specifically in the show, and I do think that has some sort of relation to something in the Marvel universe. I need to look that up. I should have looked that up before now. But Aleister Crowley had a lot to say about the Scarlet Woman, and how there was many Scarlet Women throughout his life. And essentially, she links the Scarlet Woman, maybe shockingly or not shockingly, to motherhood. And the birth of the age of Horus, which is like a new age that we would be moving into. I think currently, shoot, what age are we in? Maybe the age of Osiris, maybe something like that. But we're moving into the age of the sun, which I think is interesting in relation to the show, because in my opinion, what we have here isn't Wanda destined to destroy the world. I think she's destined to reset the world. So she's not going to destroy it. She's going to reset it. Sure. And I think that ties in to Aleister Crowley's writings. Very esoteric. I have a brief mention of the Babylon working. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. It's actually really fascinating. So L. Ron Hubbard, the creator of Scientology, and Jack Parsons, who was a rocket scientist, I believe, for NASA, actually tried to do this. So they were trying to invoke the creation of Babylon. They were trying to create the Scarlet Witch, in a sense. And Aleister Crowley wrote a book about this called Moonchild, which, if you've seen, why can't I think of this movie right now? It's like an extremely famous movie. It's set in space. There's monkeys at the beginning of it. I don't know.
Planet of the Apes?
No, there's like a black monolith.
Oh, yes. You're talking about the monolith. The 2001: A Space Odyssey?
Yes, there we go. Yes. That movie ends with the Moonchild, which is also taken from Aleister Crowley. And if you actually look at a lot of the stuff that Hollywood produces, there's a lot of weird esoteric connections to Aleister Crowley's writings. So Wanda is the Great Mother. She is the Scarlet Woman. She somehow, I think, becomes the mother of perhaps all of the X-Men entering the universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, or if it's just me talking out my butt. But
no, I mean, in regards to the literature and all of that, I unfortunately don't have a ton of feedback. I'm kind of imagining the impact of these ideas on the film franchise at large.
Right.
And I know that I personally, if you've gotten this far in the show, you must surely be aware of all the goings on in the MCU. So obviously, real quick spoiler tag, I guess, but pause. Iron Man dies at the end of Endgame, so Tony's gone. But I think ultimately, I think that was a very neat way of ending his arc. But I think ultimately Disney might be looking for a way to possibly bring Robert Downey Jr. back into the fold on things. And if we're going to follow your track here on her essentially not destroying, but resetting the MCU, that could be their in to bringing him into the fold again, but under a different contract. Because if you've followed any of the inside baseball on the MCU at large, Robert Downey Jr. had a crazy contract with Marvel and then going on with Disney regarding what his appearances would be like, how much money he would get, and whether it, that it was basically a percentage of gross of what the film made. And so that made him an extremely expensive asset, a worthwhile asset, but an expensive asset. So from my point of view, just from the real world point of view, I think that would be a clever way for Disney and Marvel to get Robert Downey Jr. back into the MCU for future projects. Because if Scarlet Witch is going to reset the Marvel Cinematic Universe, then that just opens up a whole can of worms of characters who are supposedly gone or characters who haven't been around from the beginning. Because, it begs the question, if you're at all a comic fan, like, oh, well, in the first Avengers movie, where's Spider-Man? You know, Peter Parker lives in New York. Where's Spider-Man? Why isn't he helping? You know, and all the different characters who could have been there but weren't there. This would be a good way to be a further explanation of that and to bring them into the fold.
Yeah. Well, I think too. I think there's been a lot of questions like, oh, X-Men, it's great that they're back, but I mean, Magneto's backstory dates back to the Holocaust, you know?
Right.
Like, how do you factor in that into what's already been established in the MCU? Because they were supposed to be there all along, Agatha all along, right?
Right. Not to mention, yeah, like Wanda, like canonically speaking, her and Pietro are Magneto's children.
Right.
So how do you square that?
And I don't know if that's where they're going with this, but if it is, they're introducing it beautifully, I have to admit. Like I think this is a really cool idea that they're experimenting with. And to make it Wanda, I think is really, really smart.
Sure.
I think there's something going on with Wanda's character, and I think there's a reason why, even though it wasn't supposed to be this way, why she was the beginning of Phase 4. You know, like why her show started Phase 4.
Oh, for sure. No, I totally agree. I think she has a huge part to be playing in the MCU moving forward, and I know that I'm personally really excited to see how that moves forward.
And that's actually something I wouldn't have said before I watched the show. So
sure.
Yeah, this is a deep dive, Matt. I'm loving this. I know it's going a little long. We'll try.
I don't care. We're nerds talking about shit. I'm a fan of this. Let's do the thing.
Yeah. Next up, so this is one thing I do kind of wish they would have explored more. I think they would have had to add on probably an episode or two, but the show is very focused on Wanda, maybe at the expense of Vision.
Sure.
And you could probably tell because we've almost exclusively talked about Wanda up until this point. I think it would have really been cool if they had explored the technology aspect of Vision, like really gotten into it. And like, for me, I love that interplay between magic and technology existing in the same universe. I would have loved the technology explored more as well. I think that would have been really cool. Because I mean, it is such an interesting idea because Wanda she's about magic and Vision's about technology, and they're together. Like, what does that mean? Like, as an image, like what are we trying to say with that? And I don't know if that was necessarily explored, but I find it really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Vision's gonna kind of be our, I don't know, the juxtaposition to magic moving forward because of his relationship to Wanda. And because previously that was a role held by Tony, you know, with Iron Man. You know, he was the one who, you know, speaking to Spider-Man from Infinity War, like, oh, yep, that we're here trying to save a wizard from a couple of aliens that came to kidnap him. You know, like like how his character is one that's infinitely skeptical on the whole magic front, but he, regardless of how much exposure he has to it, and now that he's gone, Vision's going to be our connection to that, or like that juxtaposition.
I thought it was a little cold. This popped out to me when I was watching it for the first time. I'm like, I like how Vision, like Wanda's imagined Vision, doesn't tell Wanda that the White Vision escaped and has his memories back before he died. I was like, that's kind of cold, dude. You should have probably told her.
I guess to be fair, he did kind of have bigger fish to fry in that he wasn't going to exist anymore. But but I do see your point, because that was I think a more of a minor shortcoming, I think, of the show.
I think it was fine. I think I'm just nitpicking, and I think there's setting it up that Vision will be back, obviously.
Well, because this feels like, I don't know, this feels like the type of thing that would ultimately be a reason for things not to move forward. So because if Wanda all of a sudden had Vision back, like, oh, you mean my beloved, he's not dead?
Right.
Well,
then
That's
the
a totally
story
different
arc,
story.
yeah, the
Yeah,
story arc
right.
wouldn't play out, right? Yeah.
Like, if would she be pursuing her children this hard? Would she be trying other means of happiness, or making boy, making do sounds so cold, but making do with just Vision and not her
Hmm.
perceived children the way she created them.
Yeah, this sets her up for growth, Before, you're right, she probably would have just gone back to Vision and things would have been kind of reset to where they were, but this is this sets her up for on a new path.
Right. And I think ultimately the White Vision wasn't interested in being found yet. I think he went from being a sentient machine with a mission to destroy the Vision to being the Vision and having to, you know, coincide those thoughts and to come to the realization that, well, he's Vision now, but what is he really?
Hmm.
You know, they use that argument of the ship being rebuilt with new parts,
Yeah, that was a really
and
cool scene. I like that
that
scene.
was a very cool scene. And I loved the tongue-in-cheek nature of oh shoot, how am I forgetting his name already? Um the actor who plays Vision.
Oh, Paul
Um
Bettany.
yeah, Paul Bettany, talking about how he was very excited to work with someone he's been wanting to work with for a long time, and it's basically just himself. Um, he
Yeah,
was
that was
making that
funny.
joke on Twitter. Yeah, I thought
It
that
was
was
it
very
was
fun.
infuriating, but also amusing.
I mean, I thought it was funny because that's just Paul Bettany being cheeky, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a very cool scene, and I love how they did that because it's so Vision, right? To
Hmm.
like, wait, run that by me again. The White Vision's like, explain, explain,
Yeah.
and I think that was a really cool scene. But yeah, I do think it's a game of telephone that didn't get uh, portrayed properly, and so now we have Wanda being lost at sea emotionally, and she has a lifeboat in the form of Vision, but they're excluding that on purpose for narrative. I think it's one of the small gripes. It wouldn't be a story if they didn't do it. So,
Yeah.
but that is a
I'm
small gripe of mine.
yeah, I mean, ultimately I'm fine with it, but it's something I noticed, so I can't imagine other people didn't notice it as well. So,
For sure. Oh yeah.
yeah. All right, I'm just gonna move on to my final thoughts here. Let's see, what did I okay, yeah, so I honestly do have a weird relationship with this show because on one hand, I can nitpick it to death, especially that finale. Like, there's parts of it that is like were really annoying to me, but at the same
Mhm.
time, like it inspired me to write 3 different blogs on my theories and thoughts on it. So it must have
Sure.
done something right. Um, the Quicksilver reveal, I didn't love. I think it'll be okay in the long run. I do kind of feel
Mhm.
Monica, even though her actress, I think did a pretty good job portraying her. I kind of felt it was half baked a little bit. Like I didn't
Mhm.
really. I thought it was kind of. I don't know if it really worked for me. I mean, I still like her character, and it also could
Mhm.
have been because of COVID and how that impacted things,
Sure.
especially near the end of the series. There was many complaints that they could have really shooken up the MCU by kind of making him a more mature outing that didn't end with a big battle. I'm fine
Mhm.
with it. Didn't bug me. I mean, I know there's people that don't like it,
Or
but again, this is one small thing in the MCU. Like it's going to continue on. I think a lot of the thoughts that we're having today and discussing on here, I think they might not all pan out, but I think it will in a lot of ways. We'll see what we're talking about going forward. I
Mhm.
I personally think. Um,
Oh yeah.
like I said, the MCU is the MCU, and this storyline is far from over. Many of the things we want to
Mhm.
see occur, it's gonna happen. So guys, everyone calm down. It's like what Matt, the director of every single episode of the show, Matt Shakman said. It's like calm down. You're gonna see it. It's just gonna take a little while. This is the first thing we've gotten in forever. It's not gonna give us Reed
Mhm.
Richards. It's not gonna give us Professor Xavier. I think a lot of people got their hopes up, me included, but that was kind of over the top probably for us to expect that in this one show.
Mhm.
Um, so that being said, like I said earlier, I do think WandaVision is going to age really, really well. I think people are
Mhm.
going to come back to the show and watch it. And I mean, it was, I love those early episodes. At first, I was kind of skeptical, but like looking at it now, they really took a risk, and I think it paid off. So good for you, Disney, and especially
Mhm.
Marvel and Kevin Feige. You guys did a good job. That's what I got.
Yeah. No, I mean, I largely agree with you on everything. I think that the show is going to age really well, and and regarding people's expectations about what was or was not going to be introduced through WandaVision, yeah, I think the expectation was a lot larger than it should have been, um, because I think that these shows through Disney Plus are going to be the the side stories and the character driven narrative, that are going to be really essential to the films when they are released. But it's going to allow them to move forward character growth without moving forward the actual overarching narrative that much. You can put new pieces on the board, but it's not going to change so much of what's going on. And I think that, like, the way that WandaVision went with revealing Evan Peters, like, yeah, I don't think we're done with him. I think he's going to come back as Quicksilver for sure. And with Monica, like, they introduced her, they introduced that she has powers, but they didn't explore very much of her powers or what she can do or what she's capable of yet, because she's probably going to be showing up in a movie later, and that's going to be a more important moment for her in the film versus during the show. And this is going to kind of tag into what we're going to end the show with, topic wise, is how Falcon and the Winter Soldier is going to be, or how that show is going to be perceived. And I think now that we've gotten WandaVision in its completion, um, I think it's going to temper expectations greatly on what Falcon and the Winter Soldier is going to bring to the table, narratively, for the MCU.
Yeah, I think I'm almost gonna withhold my judgment on Winter Soldier or Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I think it's gonna be an entirely different show. I think it's gonna feel a
Mm-hmm.
lot different. To me, sorry, that was my dog. To me, I feel more confident saying I think I know where WandaVision's going. Again, I've seen it, but like I don't know where they're gonna take Falcon and the Winter Soldier next, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know what the building block they're using for that show. Somehow I think it's probably going to tie into Black Widow maybe, but I'm not 100% sure there.
Now, the character, as far as I'm aware, the character that they're really introducing, um, in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, trying to remember his name now. He's
Oh, there's like U.S. Agent, I think,
he's
or it's something
Zemo,
like that.
Baron Zemo.
Oh, he was in Winter Soldier. No, he was in Civil War.
Yeah. Um, like, because the name, I was familiar with the name of that character, when Civil War initially released, and I was very interested in how they were going to tackle that character, because in the comics, Baron Zemo is one that, like, as far as his comic portrayal goes, he's a pretty ridiculous looking character. Like, he's got this purple mask.
Yeah,
He's
I kind of
often
like
got,
his
like,
character. I kind of like his character design. It looks kind of cool.
yeah, like, he's kind of I don't know, like a weird purple red skull almost. Like, but
Yeah,
it's all like a cloth mask, obviously.
yeah,
But um but yeah, the fact that he's going to be the main villain, I think, is a very or probably the main villain, is a very interesting thing
yeah.
that they're going to do. But like I said, I think because of what they're doing with, these MCU shows, I think Falcon and the Winter Soldier ultimately is going to be focused around Bucky finding his place in this world and reimagining what the Winter Soldier is and who he is. And then I think Falcon is going to come to terms with the fact that he is the new Captain America. He was given that shield by Steve Rogers for a reason, and that his growth in that role is going to begin and be solidified throughout that show. Not to the point that a movie wouldn't be warranted, because that'll be what the payoff will be. But yeah, I think that ultimately is what it's going to be. I think overarching narrative, we're going to not move anywhere further than where we already are. It's just going to be moving the characters and the pieces of the game board that is the MCU around for Phase 4.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think strategically, I kind of feel like since this was supposed to be the first Disney Plus Marvel show, I think they were playing it a little bit safe with this one.
Sure.
Because WandaVision is it was a risk. This one I don't think is as big of a risk. I think it's more what the MCU usually puts out. At least I assume. I might be totally off base on that. But I'm excited. I'm excited to see. Winter Soldier is a great movie. I really, really like Civil War. So I'm excited for this one, and I like Bucky and the Falcon's relationship as it was already set up. So I'm curious how that's going to play out. I'm kind of like almost not as excited for it as I was for WandaVision, just because I like the magical aspect of them MCU. But I am still really, really excited. I think I'm a little bit more excited for Loki, just because I love that idea of like him being like a time prisoner. But yeah. So.
Oh yeah, no, I think because you're right. Yeah, like WandaVision has this because of the mystical nature of it. It has this notion of anything's possible. Quicksilver's coming back. Vision's brought back to life. And there's all these crazy things that could possibly happen because Wanda's power is clearly deeply misunderstood and under-evaluated in terms of its reach. So what could possibly happen was so infinite in its possibilities. Whereas with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, this is two dudes who are going to be going on missions and beating the crap out of people, which is totally fine. But what could happen largely in the grand scheme of the show is far more limited in scope and imagination, which is fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's going to be another thing that really tempers people's expectations, is just that.
Yeah. Well, early reactions from the first episode have been really positive on Twitter, and they say the show basically opens. Sorry if you can hear my dog. This show basically opens with like this action scene, like a 10-minute action scene that's really, really good. And I do think you're right. I think it's going to be not only have a lot of action, I think it's going to be a character study of well, obviously Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I think you're going to see Falcon deal with becoming the Winter Soldier, and also I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up dealing with race and what it means to be a Black Captain America.
For sure.
And what that means. So I'm curious to see what they do with it. I do like Bucky. I know I think you said you had a little bit of skepticism of the actor just based on what you've seen from him previously. So we'll see how it plays out. But
yeah, that would be the actor for Falcon, Anthony Mackie.
Yeah.
And that was more of just like a personal preference thing with Altered Carbon.
Yeah.
But I think he's more more properly cast in his role as Falcon, and I think ultimately as the new face of Captain America. I think that's going to be very interesting to see the development of that character in that way, because leaving out the race part of that conversation completely misses the point. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that moves forward and changes how that character is portrayed in the MCU.
Know, like a part of it too is the U.S. government actually makes a new Captain America kind of character called the U.S. Agent. I don't really know much about him, but I think it's U.S. Agent.
Sure.
So I think there's going to be obviously some political commentary there, and rightly so. I mean, the Winter Soldier definitely had a lot of political commentary. And so did the Civil War, actually. So I think the show will probably have it too. The first episode is also supposed to have a pretty big cameo. People think it's probably going to be Don Cheadle, though I don't know.
That would make sense because, I mean, they're Falcon and the Winter Soldier are definitely like they're kind of newly introduced rogues, like they were on the run from the government, so they're going to need a handler. So it wouldn't surprise me if Iron Patriot was going to be kind of their handler, so to speak.
Do you know one thing that like I was like thinking about it because I was thinking about this podcast before we did it. I just kind of realized that it doesn't really make sense that Captain America got really old, because like Bucky also lived like a lifetime and he still looks exactly the same.
Well, I mean, his whole thing is that he was usually cryogenically frozen in between missions.
Well, I guess that's true.
Yeah, so
that's true.
So I see what you're saying there, but yeah, he never lived so long as like a full lifetime like Steve did after he went on his little time travel trip to drop off.
Yeah, so I guess you just don't age trinkets when you're frozen. That's fine with me. Yeah, I'm willing to suspend my disbelief. So,
but no, I'm really excited to see what happens with Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I think it's going to be less speculative and just more pure excitement on what cool new fight scene are we going to see.
And
which I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah, I'm totally down for that.
Right? Like,
yeah.
But who knows? Halfway through the season, the Mephisto in the winter Mephisto might become a reality. Who's to say?
Mephisto is going to be in every single Marvel property from now on. And if they don't make that happen, I'm going to boycott the entire series.
I'm going to boycott the entire show.
Yeah.
Once again, I am asking for your Mephisto.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's going to be really fun moving forward. Loki and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and then finally when we get to see Black Widow.
Yeah, and I think Shang-Chi is coming out in July.
Yeah. No, I think we might actually get like a proper Mandarin out of that movie. That'll be nice.
And also over the summer we're getting What If, which is an animated show by Marvel Studios. I think it's their first Marvel studio or animated Marvel Studios show. But honestly, I was thinking about that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was going to say this real fast. It's fascinating that we're playing into the multiverse, and that show is all about the multiverse, right? So
totally. Oh yeah. No, I'm so excited to talk about that in the future, in many more episodes of the Nerds of the North podcast.
Yeah, should we end it?
I think we've covered our topics well. Probably far outdone our discussions as necessary, but that kind of seems to be our shtick. So I'm going to just roll with that. But no, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today on this episode of the Nerds of the North podcast, episode number 2. We are slowly but surely getting better at recording these episodes. We have the technology. Now we just need to be smart enough to use it. So thank you so much for joining us today. I am your host, Matt, and my co-host,
Nick. Yeah, bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.